We have another Spooktober episode, so it's all about horror today. Hi, hello, and welcome back to my channel. My name is Alex, and today is going to be another Spooktober episode. This one is all about my favorite gore horror books. I've already done 2 Spooktober episodes. The first one was the Mamie series for October, and the second one was all the horror I've already read in 2024. So today we're going to talk about some of my favorite gore horror. And as I was making the list, I was like, this is getting kind of long. And some of them were coming from the archives, okay? Books I've read a long time ago that I still kind of think about every now and then. So it'll be exciting to bring some new titles to you guys today. Before we get into it, make sure you hit all the buttons down below so you know when I'm posting. I post every week, and all we do on this channel is talk about books. So if you like listening to people talk about books, here I am every week doing just that for you. So after I went through and made the list, I was like, this is too long. It was like 15, 16 books, something like that. And I was like, let's cut it down to 10, and then I can rank them, like least gory to most gory, in my opinion. Okay, this is like, horror in general is so subjective, and I feel like gore is insanely subjective because some people find things like crazy gory and then other people don't. There's also lots of different types of gore. There's body gore, there's, like, I would say like food gore, if you know what I mean. There's also like animal gore. This list does have a mix of gore in it, okay? And I will try to be specific when I talk about the books, like what kind of gore it was or why it ranked where it ranked. But yeah, today is gonna be my top 10 favorite gore horror books. And yeah, there are a few on here that I don't think I've talked about either in like a really long time or at all on my channel. So yeah, and then you will see some repeat fan favorites. It can't be helped. Some of my favorite horror books ever are on this list. So yeah, let's not waste any more time. Let's get into it. So we're going to start at number 10, which is going to be the least gory, and move our way up to number 1, which is going to be most gory in my opinion. At number 10, we have House by Frank E. Peretti. Y'all, I read this book so long ago. I still think about this. This book was really, really different in a way that I wasn't really expecting. We have a couple that's like traveling back roads, something like that. They're trying to get wherever they're going. They get either put on a detour or they take a shortcut, and their car breaks down right outside of this house. So they decide to go to this house to get help. Once they get inside, they realize there are other couples there that cars have also broken down in a very nearby area. Next thing they know, they're locked in this house, and the only way to get out is to go down into the basement, which is basically a maze full of very weird rooms, and they can't really decide if it's psychological or if it's real. First of all, this book was all over the place. I could not tell what kind of horror this was gonna be when I started this book, because at the beginning it felt very like Texas Chainsaw Massacre, like they get locked in the house by outside forces. It also felt kind of like The Strangers, where people were like messing with them. But then once we go into the basement, it very sharply turns into more like paranormal, because you don't really know what's real. What's really real in this house, okay? And it turned into just like House of Horrors type stuff. I remember not really loving this book. I had a lot of issues with this book. The plot for me didn't work that well. What did work for me was the gore. This book was pretty gross. I read it so long ago that I couldn't tell you exactly what kind of gore it was, but I remember thinking I could not eat while I was reading this book. I know there was a lot of body gore in here, and there was also food gore, which like for me is like some of the grossest stuff. I don't know. That really weirds me out. There was just so much happening in this book. It really was all over the place. This was written by 2 separate authors. I know Frank Peretti was one. I can't remember what the other one's name is. But that was one of my bigger complaints about this book, is that you could feel that it was written by 2 separate people, sort of having separate agendas with the book. I really felt a big division in this book, and it's almost like I could tell who wrote the chapters. Like, some chapters went together insanely well, and then we would be interrupted with these other chapters that didn't match the plot of the book. That is my biggest complaint about this book, and it is one of the reasons why it's lower on the list, is because there was just not enough cohesion in this book. I think if you want something really weird and really gross, this would take a lot of boxes. Number 9 is Nosferatu by Joe Hill. If you haven't read Joe Hill, okay, or if you don't know who Joe Hill is Stephen King's son, who is also a writer. If you like Stephen King, or you like the idea of Stephen King, I think that Joe Hill is better, okay? I know that's like insanely controversial or subjective or whatever. I like the idea of Stephen King. I don't actually like reading Stephen King, okay? The books are so dense. I really just can't hang, okay? I really can't. And every book has like the smallest print in it. It was like it was written in like half space with like 10 sized font. Why is it so small? Why is it so dense? Why are all of his books like 1,000 pages? I really just don't have the mental capacity to read like that. I have read a couple of his books, and like, to be fair, those books were really, really good, but it was such a slog for me. I think Joe Hill accomplishes the same amount of horror and spectacular writing that Stephen King does in a much nicer format and a more concise piece, okay? It's not an 800-page book. He usually keeps it to around 450 to 500, which for me is still a little big, but it's much more manageable than Stephen King size books. So this book in particular was the first Joe Hill book I read, and I really, really liked it. It is about a young woman. We start when she's a teen, she's a teen, and she has the ability to travel across time on her bicycle. She gets on her bicycle and she rides it through a tunnel that she builds in her mind, and she comes out in a different time. At some point, she loses the ability to ride her bike because she actually like loses it in the tunnel after some incident. She goes someplace that she's not really supposed to be, and in the time when she's trying to come back, she actually loses her bicycle. Cut to many years later, she's an adult, she has a child, she has a husband, but all this time, this place where she wasn't supposed to go haunts her continuously. And then one day, her son goes missing, and she receives a message saying that the place that she's not supposed to go, that's where her son is. And so she must figure out how to travel back in time, or back to this secret place, to retrieve her son. This had a really interesting mix of like fantasy horror with just like old school like vampire horror. There was so much going on in this book, and I think Joe Hill really capitalized in all the right places. Now, was it super, super gory? No, it was not super gory like compared to some of the other books that are on this list, but there were a few moments where I was like, oof. Okay, that's why it's low on the list, is because the gore is not very heavy here, but there were some really, really nice moments. The rest of it is just very good creative writing. I've never quite read a book like this one. Like, the plot to me was so unique. The idea of everything was so interesting, and then the way that it all tied together at the end was incredibly neat. If you want to read this around a holiday, Christmas, okay? Trust me on that. Read it around Christmas if you want it to like match the feel of like real life. This book, I don't know how to explain it. It's just so different. Was way beyond anything that I was hoping to experience, and Joe Hill really blew me away. Number 8 is The Ruins by Scott Smith. Okay, I read this for last Spooktober, and I was not prepared for this book because it really, I don't know what I was expecting, but it wasn't this, okay? This is about a group of friends that go on vacation. Can't tell you now, honestly, somewhere in South America, I think. While this group of American friends befriends like a German, not couple, but like, I think they're brothers. And while they're there, they kind of hang out and they see each other every day. Well, this guy, one of the brothers, comes up to them and says, I got this weird note from my brother. He said he found this like ruins place, like a dig site of an ancient civilization or something, and he's going with a friend there, and he wants me to meet him. Everything feels wrong. Nothing feels right about this. I think he's missing. Will you guys come help me find him at this like lost civilization place or whatever? And about half of the friends, like the Americans, are like, no, let's not go. And the other half of them, like, yeah, we need to help him. Like, he's alone. Like, if at least all of us go, then there'd be safety in numbers. So, yeah, they end up going, of course. And when they get to where they're going, it's very hard to figure out where exactly they are. No one there really speaks English. And next thing they know, they're at this, like, abandoned dig site surrounded by locals that are not letting them leave. And that's kind of where the story takes off, and we start to understand why this dig site is like not supposed to be disturbed and why they don't let people just come and go from there. I really can't tell you anymore because it really would give away way too much about what this book is about. I really didn't see any of this coming. I don't really know what I was expecting, but it wasn't what it ended up being. As far as gore goes, the gore was pretty good. The reason it's so low on the list is because it's sort of one-dimensional. Once you see what you're seeing in the book, there's not that many variations on what's happening. So, like, once the big reveal comes out, that is kind of the extent of the gore. We see a few variations, slight variations on the gore that happens, but it's all pretty much the same. Everything kind of has the same effect, I would say. It's very different. All of this is considered body gore, though, so if you don't like that, this is probably going to be a little bit too much. But this book was almost like a social experiment as well as a horror novel. It's interesting to see what will happen to people when they're stranded, when they're alone, when they're fighting for survival. So there's a lot of that aspect happening in this book too, on top of like the actual horror aspect of it. So yeah, I read this last year. I thought it was really good. It wasn't what I was expecting, and yeah, the gore was pretty mild. Number 7 is My Best Friend's Exorcism by Grady Hendrix. This was the first Grady Hendrix book I ever read, and this is still by far my favorite Grady Hendrix book. Okay, I don't feel like he has topped this book for me. Of all the other Grady Hendrix books I've read, this one remains my favorite, and I'm a little afraid that he won't write at this caliber again. Anyway, let's get into it. This is about a group of teens, and one of the teen girls gets possessed by something, and one of the other friends is convinced that she needs an exorcism. This is very nostalgic horror, okay? That's really all I'm going to tell you about that is that, I mean, it says it in the title, My Best Friend's Exorcism. It's a group of teens that kind of get mixed up in something, and they're convinced that something is possessing their friend, and they need to get her exorcised, basically. So much nostalgia in this. This is set in like the 90s, so just like that era, Grady Hendrix is a really good nostalgia writer, and it really paid off in this book. There was just so much cool nostalgic stuff happening. This also felt very old school horror, okay, which I think he writes very well, and it was one of the reasons I really liked the book. In terms of gore, lots of body gore in this book, also animal gore. If you cannot read that, that was very difficult for me in this book. It was a very limited space, but it still was very prominent for me. The reason this one's low on the list, really was just a bunch of moments, okay? It wasn't just dripping with gore, but there were a lot of little moments where you're like, that's really gross. So yeah, it's not overpowering, but it was still very good. Number 6 is Just Like Home by Sarah Gailey. Y'all have heard me talk about this book if you've been on my channel a minute, and you know that I fangirl Sarah Gailey pretty heavy. This book was incredibly unique to me, and I was not expecting there to be as much gore in it as there was. Pretty much every other Sarah Gailey book I have read has not had any gore in it at all, so this was a shock, literally, to read so much gore. And Sarah Gailey can write gore, okay? So this book settles around a young woman who gets a phone call that her mother is dying, and her mother wants her to come home so she can see her before she passes away. This young woman has not been home in a long time. The last time she was home, her father was getting arrested for being a serial murderer, and not long after that, she moved as far away as possible and decided not to ever come back. The mom and the daughter are very estranged. The daughter and the father are very estranged. This family is a mess. But she decides, you know what? She's dying. I'm gonna go. It's the right thing to do. Say goodbye, settle old wounds, say goodbye to the house, whatever. So she ends up going. When she gets there, the first thing that she notices is that her mother has rented out her dad's old like workshop to some artist guy that is sort of like obsessed with her dad and his like serial murders. And as she's starting to pack up the house and get her mother's like final wishes and things in order, she starts finding notes from her dad pertaining to his previous crimes. And this kind of sends her into the depths of the house and history to find out, one, who's leaving the notes, and two, what it's all really about. When you look at this from the cover or from the blurb, this does not sound like a horror book, right? This sounds almost like a serial killer thriller story, right? And you would be right, but you'd also be wrong. This book was so much deeper than I was thinking, and the gore in this is really good. I really would consider this a horror novel because it is in no way a thriller. We are getting the story to this woman's dad's serial murders, but it was so much deeper than that. And everything about this book breathes old horror, okay? The body gore in this book was amazing. This is really just old haunted house stuff and mixed with new like serial killer thriller vibes. It was immaculately done, all right? And this book was so gross. If you do well with sounds or descriptions of sounds, it really worked, okay? And I did this on audiobook, and the narrator was fantastic. She really made it come alive the whole time. And I typically don't listen to horror on audiobooks because it usually doesn't really translate that well. And this narrator translated it very well. It was exceptionally done. This book was originally in the top 5, and I had to dump it down 1. I think that the gore in this book was amazing, but mixed with the plot line of the book made it even better because it just was not anything that I was expecting. And Sarah Gailey really blew me away. We are now entering the top 5, which are going to be the goriest books on the list. Everything from here on out, I would suggest do not eat while you read it, because this is not going to be moments. These last 5 books are not moments books. These last 5 books have gore written throughout the entire thing. And they're pretty heavy and they're pretty gross, and they might turn your stomach a little bit. Coming in at number 5 is The Only Good Indians by Stephen Graham Jones. This was the first Stephen Graham Jones book I ever read, and I really, really liked it. As far as gore goes, this one is the goriest of his I've read. And I've done My Heart is a Chainsaw and Don't Fear the Reaper, which are also pretty gory. This one still gets to me, okay? This is a lot of animal gore in this one, and also like skinwalker gore, if that makes any sense to you, if you know what I mean by that. Lots of stuff like that. Some really decent body gore in this one too. That would be moments though. Everything else, it's pretty gory throughout. So this is about a group of boys that at the beginning of the book, they're going on an elk hunting trip. Indigenous boys, they're going on reservation to hunt in a very specific spot. And this specific spot is supposed to be closed. Like, they're not supposed to hunt there. They hunt there anyway. They get caught. They say, yeah, we're sorry, whatever. And they leave. Years later, like 20 years later, all of a sudden, each of them are getting pursued and end up dead by something they don't understand and they can't explain. Eventually, they all kind of gather together to sort of ride out their last days as whatever is pursuing this group continues to pursue them. I'm not going to tell you anymore. This book is pretty complicated. I will say for my first Stephen Graham Jones book, I thought it was really, really complicated. The first half of the book was insanely slow, but it really made up for it in the second half. The indigenous folklore in this book was unmatched, okay? There were some of the coolest stories I've ever heard in this book, and I really loved how Stephen Graham Jones capitalized on that and really just made it shine as a horror novel. The gore is gross. Like I said, lots of animal gore and body gore happening throughout this book. Stephen Graham Jones is an insanely talented gore writer. It shows in all of his writing, his talent for gore. And yeah, since this was the first one, I wanted to put My Heart is a Chainsaw on here as well, but I've talked about that book quite a bit on my channel lately, and I think this one deserves its time to shine as well, as this was the first one I ever read, and this book really got me hooked on Stephen Graham Jones. Number 4 is Jackal by Aaron E. Adams. I love talking about this book, y'all. I read this one last year, not for Spooktober, but for something else, and I absolutely fell in love with this. I really wish Aaron E. Adams would put out more books because this is her only one right now. So we follow a woman of color as she returns to her very small, very racist Appalachian town to attend a wedding of her best friend. She has vowed that she will not come back to this town, so she's really just coming back for the wedding, and she's literally splitting the next day. This town has a very thick history of being insanely racist, and also a lot of black women go missing in this town. Either they disappear of their own volition, or they go into the woods and they never come out. And they're either found dead or not found at all. So while she's at this wedding, a young girl that is very close to her gets too close to the woods and disappears. And basically the whole point of the novel is for our main character to hopefully find and recover this young girl before she disappears for good or ends up dead, like shows up dead so many days later or something like that. The folklore horror in this book really blew me away. Erin E. Adams is actually from this town that she's writing about in this book, and the historical value of this story is insane. If you read the author's notes and if you do like some Googling and stuff, you will see how much effort and work Erin E. Adams put into making sure this was historically accurate and incredibly damning of a story, if you ask me. I love stories about Appalachia. Okay, I love that whole idea. There's tons of folklore stories around that area, and this is just like the epitome of if you saw something, no you didn't. The amount of fear that she was able to pump into this was insane. Lots of animal gore, lots of body gore, and just an amazing amount of, one, historical value, and two, folklore history in this book. It was incredibly well done. She really had me buried deep in this book. I could not look away. This one is near the top because, one, the gore is incredibly well done, well read and gross, and two, the value of the story in general. This book was so well written. Okay, I cannot emphasize that enough. Erin E. Adams really blew me away. I cannot wait until she writes more. Number 3, top 3, you guys. These all are going to be really gross. Number 3 is The Loop by Jeremy Robert Johnson. I just read this book a couple months ago for my book club. I'll kind of give you the highlights of it. This book centers around a group of teens that are in the last month or so of their senior year. They're sitting in class, and one of the students stands up, clutching the back of his neck and like kind of having an outburst, and then all of a sudden he's up at the front of the class like beating the teacher to death. A SWAT team comes in out of nowhere and like puts this kid down. It's a mess. In the aftermath of that wonderful day at school, the kids are like, you know, we need to go off and blow off some steam. We need to get out of here. Anything to get away from school. So they go to this area of town that's sort of well known for partying. It's sort of like a cave system. And they go down into the caves and they start hanging out and partying. And then all of a sudden everything goes wrong and people start dying in the cave. And we see our little group of teens escaping that situation and then figuring out how are they going to make it through the night and possibly make it out of their town alive. The reason this one is so high on the list, okay? Opening 2 pages of this book were disgusting, and it just did not let up one single bit, okay? That thing I was telling you about at the beginning of the book, that happened first 2 pages, okay? We're seeing so much gross stuff in this book, so much body gore in this book. I cannot even tell you. There were a few people in my book club that got through the first chapter and said, this book's not for me. This is way too much. Okay, that made my little horror heart happy, but on the other end of it, I am reminded that not everybody loves gore horror. This was really gross from start to finish. It is all body gore horror, I would say. If you look at some of my other reviews for this book, it kind of gives you an example of how much this book reminds me of so many other things all mixed together. There's a lot happening in this book. A lot of different types of horror genre sort of coalescing together to create this book, and it really was so masterfully done. I absolutely loved it. It was incredibly gross, though, from start to finish, and Jeremy Robert Johnson did not let up the whole time. Number 2 is Touch the Night by Max Booth III. Y'all, I have not talked to y'all about this book in so long. It was probably last Spooktober that I talked to y'all about this book. This book is nasty, okay? Just, oh, it's so gross. It's so gross. But it's the top 2 for a reason, okay? This book settles around 2 young men of color. I think they're like 13, 14. They're out one night, just kind of like screwing around, probably like 1 a.m., something like that. And not doing anything wrong. They're just out and about, hanging out. And as they're about to walk into their home, like they're 2 friends and they're staying the night with each other, as they're about to walk back into the house where they're staying, they get stopped by the cops. Where are you going? What are you doing? What are you doing out? You shouldn't be out. And then all of a sudden, these boys are in the back of the cop car, but they know right away that these cops aren't really cops, that there's something like seriously wrong with them. And that's the last time that those boys were seen. The next morning, their moms don't know where they are, and the police have no record of them getting picked up. So these 2 moms decide, you know what, we're going to find our kids. And they go out on a hunt to find their boys. This is a really interesting story because we're getting a lot of really interesting civil rights stuff happening in this book. In the meantime, we're getting just hammered by old school horror, okay? This is told in like 2 separate type stories. The one story is what's happening to these boys after they got into the cop car, and then the other half of the story is what is happening with the moms as they're trying to find the 2 boys. I had no idea what this book was going to be about when I opened it, but I couldn't put it down, and it ended up being nothing like what I thought it was going to be. There was so much happening in this book. So many vibes, okay? I'm getting a lot of Texas Chainsaw vibes, a lot of Children of the Corn vibes, but we're also getting a lot of like sci-fi type stuff in there too, which I really could not explain. I really can't explain it. Like, you would really just have to read it to understand. And the ending ended up being so much bigger than I was thinking, way beyond what I was prepared for. This ending just hit me pretty hard, okay? I was really hoping that Max Booth III would write a sequel to this book, but he has not yet. I don't know. I read this book when it first came out, though, and it really blew me away. Why is it so high on the list? This book was so gross. We have body gore, we have animal gore, and we have food gore. My top 3, okay? And he wrote this with such precision, I could not eat. I could not eat when I was reading this. I can't think about this book while I'm eating. This book sits with me years after I've read it, okay? I still think about this book. I still think about how gross it was. It still turns my stomach to think about this book, okay? And I think I read it 4 years ago. You really need to be mentally prepared for this book, not just for the gore, but there is so much happening. Like, it's a really big mix of horror genres that all really work together. But yeah, it's really gross, it's really weird, and there are a lot of really high points in this one. All right, this is the last one. Number 1, The Deep by Nick Cutter. If y'all been here a minute, you know that I think Nick Cutter is one of the nastiest writers, okay? He does gore insanely well, and he does not let up. It's so gross. This book is about a pandemic that has happened on the earth that does not allow people to remember. Basically, it's not so much like, oh, I lost my keys, I can't find stuff. Like, it starts as that, and then it progresses to you forget how to breathe, your brain forgets how to function type of thing. And this has hit the world pretty hard, all right? And we have 2 brothers, all right? One who is a super scientist, and then one who basically is not. And the super scientist brother is like, we're developing this lab in the deepest part of the ocean, and we're going to go down there and we're going to figure out how to fix this pandemic, and then we're going to come up and cure everybody. The other brother is not a scientific miracle worker or anything. And basically he gets a call from the government that's like, hey, your brother has requested your presence in the bottom of the ocean to help find a cure for this pandemic. And when the government calls you to come do something, you pretty much just go and do it. So he goes down in a submarine with a couple other people down to this underwater base that they have conveniently lost contact with. And they're like, yeah, your job is to see what's going on down there and bring everybody back up. And he's like, yeah, sure. Why not? Immediately upon getting to this weird underwater lab, him and the people that he's with are very immediately hit with something's very wrong. Nothing down here has gone right. And basically their whole job is to collect the scientists that are down there and bring them up and to establish contact again with the base. This was a trip, okay? Psychological trip, oh my gosh. First of all, just the idea of being down that deep underwater and the isolation and basically the continued darkness of that place and how that plays into people's minds and insecurities and paranoias are very prevalent in this book. There's also something much bigger happening here than I was prepared for. All right, and Nick Cutter did a really good job ending that on like a mind-blowing revelation, which I really appreciated. But yeah, this book is gross. It's gross. And it's gross from the beginning. At first it's just like little moments and you're like, oh, that was nasty, and then he just doesn't stop. He keeps making it grosser. The longer we stay in there, the longer you're locked into this book, the more gross it's gonna get, okay? And he doesn't dial it down, ever. He just keeps turning it up the whole way. And you can't look away because you wanna know what the answers are, but you also don't wanna watch because it's so gross. Everything about this was so gross. There were so many nasty things about this book. This is like, this and the Touch Tonight book are tied because they are both equally disgusting. Nick Cutter is a very good gore writer, and everybody says that about him, and I always caution people when they say they want to read Nick Cutter, if you cannot do gore, you cannot read his books, okay? And I'm not trying to be rude or whatever. I'm warning you, okay? From the bottom of my horror-loving heart, I am warning you. This man is nasty, okay? It will make your stomach clench and churn, and you will never be able to look at this book again and think, yes, I can read that again. Because no, I cannot. I read it once and that was enough. This book really did blow me away because of how big he ended up building it out. This has body gore and animal gore. It does not have food gore in it that I recall. I still think about this book and it still churns my stomach. Okay, that's all I have for you guys today. That was my top 10 favorite gore horror novels ever, I guess. Like I said, the list was longer, but I ended up cutting it down. 1, because of time, and 2, because I wasn't going to be able to rank them. If you have any other books that you think are more gore heavy than these, let me know in the comments. I would love to look at those. I like a gore horror, okay, but I can't do it all the time. It has to be like maybe one for Spooktober. Like, they can't all be super gory because then I lose my appetite to read, basically. So yeah, let me know in the comments if you have any that are your favorite gore horror books. Make sure you all the buttons down below so you know when I'm posting. I post every week, and we still have one more episode of Spooktober to come up. I'm so excited to share that with you guys. And then we will have the October wrap-up in November, and that will be the last Spooktober episode of the year. I hope you all will stick around for that. Thanks for stopping by, and I will see you all next time. Bye!